Hey Brick Maniacs, it is Lando here at the designer's desk of Dan Siskind with his all-new Panzer 38T. This is Czechoslovakian?
Yes, it was actually German.
German,
It's
yes.
made by Czechoslovakia before World War II, so it was actually like the Panzer 35, well, whatever that was in the Czech language. But when Germany annexed the Czechoslovakia, they inherited this actually like budding arms industry that the Czechs were making these tanks for export, and the Germans basically took them over, made it one of their own. So it was actually quite advanced for its time. When Germany took them over, they were actually considered superior to the German tanks at the time. So these tanks were incorporated into the Wehrmacht, the German army. Have a couple different marking schemes here.
Yeah.
They're actually for different battles, but these are painted as they were when the Germans invaded Poland, and they still had the same brown and dark gray camouflage scheme that they from that campaign into France and even into Barbarossa in Russia.
Very interesting, very interesting. So you mentioned there's two different variants here.
Well, they're both the same. The variants are the markings.
Yeah.
So when Germany invaded Poland, when that war began, the Germans used just a white cross. They didn't really have much of a national symbol. It was just a simple white cross. And they actually found that made such a good target for anti-tank guns to zoom in on. They're like, oh, we better make it a little bit more less easy to zoom in on. So they did this one instead. So you have the black cross. That's how the classic German Balkenkreuz was created, right there in the Polish campaign. And then this would be all the later years. So you actually have two different turret number sets, and the classic turret numbers, or else you have the tank number on the hull here.
So these represent, so this is earlier and this is a little bit later, is what you're saying?
Right. So if you wanted to do a mock that was a Polish campaign, this would be your sticker set. It comes with both, just out of hand. We put two in there. This would be more typical for Barbarossa, the Russian campaign, or France.
Right. So this is for the Polish campaign. What kind of tanks would they be facing against?
Well, in Poland didn't have very many armored vehicles. They had the 7TP. It's a 7-ton tank. It was modeled after the Vickers light tank. It actually wasn't a 7-ton tank. It was much heavier than that. They kept up armoring it and put a big gun. It was actually a very decent tank for its time. They were very comparable. It's just that the Germans had more.
Right.
There was also like the TKS, their little armored vehicles. Mm-hmm. But typically speaking, one of the reasons that the Germans were able to get as far as they could in Poland was that they had so many more armored vehicles. They were very still in this early stage of developing the Panzerwaffe. This is like the Panzer arm of the Wehrmacht. And they use these light tanks, the first actual use of tanks as a fighting formation. Rather than tanks supporting infantry, they actually just said, let's put all these tanks in one unit and let them go, so that they would just go as far as they could, like a breakthrough, breakout kind of thing, and fight as a tank unit. These were the first real, homogeneous tank, full-on
So
tank
used in a
units.
more kind of modern use, I guess.
Aggressive. You basically take it,
aggressive.
make an iron gauntlet or whatever, a steel gauntlet. You just punch your way through whatever resistance. Unless you had a bunch of artillery or anti-tank guns, the tanks were pretty much unstoppable.
So would they use that kind of style tank formations throughout the rest of the war? Kind of pave the way for it?
That was the heart. That's the way that the Blitzkrieg worked. Is tanks supported by aircraft would punch their way through any resistance, and so. And the aircraft would basically use as flying artillery. So tanks would run into resistance. Instead of them trying to take it on, they'd send in the Stukas, and the Stukas would just wipe them out with bombs, and the tanks would just keep rolling. So.
Awesome. I guess obviously this is a really awesome camouflage color scheme. You mentioned brown and dark gray. I know we're limited by the color selections of Lego. How close does this compare to the? This
is right on.
Yeah.
I mean, this is exactly the way that these tanks would have looked. Basically, they phased it out as the paint wore out. They just would field modify them gray or do some other camouflages. When the Panzer 38 ended up kind of came to its end in the Russian campaign, they were still really effective at the beginning of the Russian campaign, but as soon as they got fairly deep into Soviet territory, they met the T-34, which had a much bigger gun, And they ran into Soviet anti-tank guns, 76 millimeter anti-tank guns, 45 millimeter anti-tank guns. The Soviets are just better prepared than the Germans were.
Sure.
The Germans really underestimated how developed the Soviet armed forces were and how advanced their tanks were. So these were great against, at the time the Germans only knew about the BT tanks and the T-26 light tanks. They had no idea what was waiting for them in Russia. And these are, one thing that was notable about the Czech tanks is they used a more brittle steel than the Germans did. So when these would get hit by anti-tank guns, they typically, the armor would, instead of it being flexible and the shells bouncing off, they would actually shatter the armor plates on these. So when you put a heavy, like a 76 millimeter anti-tank gun versus one of these, they were known to like actually break off pieces of the tanks, break off pieces of the armor, and a lot of them had riveted the construction.
Into the interior.
Right, yeah, it would actually break off. A chunk of the turret would go flying off. Rather than penetrating it, it would actually just break it. It would crack and chip, metal chunks go flying everywhere.
Right.
So if you happen to be inside, that happens. It's bad news. And also, they had a real problem with spalting. And spalting occurs when a shell hits either the tank, or hits the side of the armor, or maybe rivets, because they used riveted the armor panels together. Yeah. Spalting happens when pieces of metal flake off the inside of the tank, and they're basically shards of metal. Shrapnel.
Kind of like a shotgun blast.
Yeah, it's sort of like it hits one side and a piece of the armor goes flying.
So it still has a ton of energy behind it.
Right, and it's red hot, and the rivets are always brittle. They're always weak spots. So
sure.
They ended up phasing these things out pretty early in the war, using the hulls to make the Martyrs, several different Martyr anti-tank guns, and then of course the Hetzer.
Interesting.
Was based on the same hull. Lots of vehicles actually came based on the same hull.
So this is the first time we've seen kind of this camouflage color scheme of this. I understand you've made a similar model to this in the past?
This is very much a reissue of the Panzer 38T that was in the original Barbarossa book. Okay. It's been updated. This rolls better. There's a lot of things that work better on this than the original. We have parts now that didn't exist back then. So, as always, trying to upgrade, update. So it has the same basic look. It's just better. So the tracks do roll pretty well. And I think the last time we had this thing out, you get the tracks would get way more hung up down here.
Yeah.
Even on the smooth surface, they roll pretty good.
Nice.
It does have one opening turret for the commander. The gun does elevate and depress. Well, it elevates, doesn't necessarily depress all the way, but it does go up and down. So you do have that, sense of realism that you put on. This thing here is not it's not a close-in self-defense weapon. It actually is the antenna.
I don't remember that being on the original model.
I don't think that piece existed back then.
I don't know.
That was it's a relatively new Lego element.
Yeah.
So it is all Lego. There's no other third-party things on it except, of course, our tracks.
Yeah, cool. Well, this is a nice standard tank. It's a good brick mania.
It is a very affordable entry-level tank.
Yeah.
If you're making a diorama or something similar to that, this is going to be a very affordable option. As opposed to these big monster tanks that, towards the end of the war, they just kept getting bigger and bigger and heavier.
Right.
So as a light tank, you can't go wrong with this.
Very, very cool. All right. I think that should about wrap it up, right?
Yeah, that's all I can think of.
Cool. All right, that is Dan's all-new Panzer 38T tank, designed by Dan Siskind. Available right now at brickmania.com while supplies last.
While supplies, we'll try to keep them in stock. We'll try. We'll do our best, but we don't control the flow of parts.
Yeah, that's how it goes. Yeah. Anyways, with that's the episode. For more information, brickmania.com, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much for watching.